My humble pronouns to all dignitaries in the dais and to all the students who have come here and all the academicians who are here. Basically, I am not an orator, so you will have to bear with me if my speech is kind of boring or not that eloquent. So, what is this book about? This book is because of a specific condition in which I grew. I come from Kanyakumari district, which you might be knowing is dominated by other religious people. Growing in a traditional Hindu family, I used to hear a lot of stories told to me by my mother, and when she was feeding, she used to tell me stories from a particular book called Sri Mahabhakta Vichayam. And when I went to school, and all the people around me, most of the people, they used to depict Hinduism as kind of an inherent evil. Indian culture is something very deficient. Particularly, they used to say that it was very deficient in its human values, how they treat the other humans. That is what I also learned from the textbooks. So one of the first lessons you learn in history textbook is that Ashoka got converted to Buddhism. So there was something deficient in Hinduism, particularly somehow you become insensitive to human suffering, and because of that you always have to get converted to another religion, something better than this particular way of life. So that was something that was told again and again around me at that time. But that created a conflict because the stories I heard from my parents they were not telling that to me. They were not telling me that you should treat humans in a different way. Instead, they told me that you should see divine in all the humans. Particularly the most marginalized, the depressed, disadvantaged sections of the society, you have to see them as divine and you have to serve them. That is what those stories told me. And this is what the academia told me, this is what the environment around me told me, and exactly opposite thing, that is what a section of the polity also started telling. So I wanted to know what is the truth. I started actually going into history and I started studying it. And when you start studying history, you are getting all kind of perspectives. So I think I will start by telling you a story that I have heard when I was a child, and later I studied also that particular story from the Purana in which it was written. It is called Kaisika Mahatmya. So there was a untouchable. At that time he was considered as an untouchable. The particular Purana tells that he used to eat the meat of the flesh of the dog. But he always in the morning, he used to go and he used to play Kaisika Raga in front of Vishnu. He lived in a South Indian village called Tirukurungudi. In Sanskrit, that place was called Siddhasrama. So every morning at Brahma Muhurta, his Tamil name was Nambadwan. This Nambadwan used to go to the Vishnu temple, and in front of the Vishnu temple, in front of Vishnu himself, and each of these words are very significant. Later I understood that. He used to go and stand in front of Vishnu and he used to sing the morning prayer song for Vishnu. And he used to come back. That is what he used to do every morning. So one day when he was going like that, a Brahma Rakshas caught hold of him. And the Brahma Rakshas told him that for a long time people never used to use this path, and today you have used that path, because he had used that path on that particular day. He had to go, somehow he got delayed, he had to go early in the Brahma Muhurta and he had to sing. So he has used the short path. That time the Brahma Rakshas caught him. And the Brahma Rakshas told him that I am going to eat you, and even though you look very weak, because of the music in you, your flesh is going to taste very nice for me, and I'm not going to leave you. So this Nambadwan told the Brahma Rakshas, okay, you can eat me, but allow me to go to the temple and sing this morning prayer song for Vishnu, the Brahma Muhurta. The Brahma Rakshas said, suppose I am leaving you. Which rational, sane person would come back to a Brahma Rakshas to get eaten by it? So now, according to the Purana, Nambadwan tells the Brahma Rakshas that Satya Moolam Jagat Sarvam. So, I am a person who walks the path of truth. I shall never deviate from truth. And if I deviate from truth, he lists a long list of sins. And he says, let all those sins come to me if I don't come back to you. At last, the Brahma Rakshas relents and allows him to go. So he goes as usual, he goes to the temple, he goes in front of Vishnu, he sings in Kaisika Raga, he comes back. As he was coming back, an old man appears before him. And he is asking him, I used to watch you every day. And always you used to walk very slowly, calmly, peacefully. But today you are walking very fast. Why? And then he says that, see, this Brahma Rakshas is waiting for me. If I am walking slow, then his meal would be delayed. So I am walking fast. So the old man says, are you a fool? It is time for you to go away. This Brahma Rakshas is not an ethical Rakshasa like Vibhishana or anybody. He is going to kill you. He is going to eat you. You have duty for your family. Without leaving all that, how can you go like this? Then he says, I am not going to deviate from the Satyam that I have given to the Brahma Rakshas. And then he tells, even if my self-preserving instincts are making me to go away from the truth, my inherent conduct, the seelam, that would make me get established in truth. So I cannot deviate from the truth. I am going to go to the Brahma Rakshas. Actually, the old man was Vishnu himself, and he came to test the resolve of this Nambadwan. So Nambadwan goes to the Brahma Rakshas. So the Brahma Rakshas is amazed. That particular moment, the Brahma Rakshas has a change of his heart. Instead of eating this man, let us get punya from this man and let us liberate ourselves from being a Brahma Rakshas. So it is asking him, I don't want to eat you, I will leave you. Just give me your punya. And now Nambadwan says, see, that was not the deal that we made. You told me that you are going to eat me and I have come here to offer myself to you. You have to eat me. That is the deal. I am not going to give you punya or anything. You can eat me. So this conversation goes on for a long time. At last he says, the Brahma Rakshas says, just give me the punya of one song that you sang in Kaisika Raga to the deity. That one punya, that strand of a punya you give me. Now, Nambadwan asks the Brahma Rakshas, how is it that you have become a Brahma Rakshas? What is the wrong thing that you did that you have been born as Brahma Rakshas? Then the Brahma Rakshas says, I was a Brahmin called Soma Sharma and I was doing yajna for the sake of Lobha and Moga, and because of that, because I wanted material things and I did yajna, because of that sin now I have been born as a Brahma Rakshas. So he gives that small bit of punya to Brahma Rakshas and the Brahma Rakshas gets liberated from its horrible form. Now, the whole story is embedded in Varaha Purana, and the Varaha Murti or Vishnu himself is telling this story to Lakshmi Devi, and then he makes this statement. This statement is the most important statement. He says that the same way Nambadwan liberated the Brahma Rakshas, I shall liberate my bhaktas. Now, you should understand here one important thing. Suppose Sri Krishna says, I will protect you the same way Arjuna protected Uttara Kumara. Suppose he is saying like that. It doesn't make sense because Krishna is this great person. He cannot compare in any way himself with the Arjuna. But think about this particular narrative in this Purana where the Lord of the universe is saying that I am ready to liberate my devotees the same way Nambadwan, a so-called untouchable, liberated a Brahmin who had become a Brahmarachas. Now, okay, this is an imaginary story. Let us assume that this is an imaginary story. Why should a culture create this story? That is the question that we have to ask. Why should a culture create such a story that says that an untouchable would liberate a Brahmarachas and the God himself would equate himself with the untouchable? Okay, I will just leave it at that. So what kind of the dynamics, what kind of the cultural dynamics should have been present there to effect this particular, to create this particular kind of a story? If at all it was a story. Because Puranas, we have to understand that they are a different way of expressing the reality. The historical reality is expressed in a very different way. Historical and the psychological realities are expressed in a very different way in Puranas. That is the language of the Puranas. Now, this particular book deals with the various phases of Indian history, right? As Dr. Ram Sharma pointed out, 5,000 years of Indian history. Okay. And what I discovered was that in any society, there are always forces of social stagnation and also there are forces of social emancipation. In all the societies, in all the pre-modern societies, the social stratification has always been based on birth. The social stratification had always been based on birth in all pre-modern societies. If you take, for example, a country like Germany or even Britain, if you look at the pre-modern society, you would find that all the occupations were according to birth. There were hereditary guilds. Then there were something called defiled trades. So these defiled trades were practiced by a certain group of people and those people were treated as untouchables. So this was present in England. And this has a religious justification also. There was a religious justification also for that. However, these societies, there were social forces of social emancipation. Those forces of social emancipation were catalyzed by pure socio-economic factors. Pure socio-economic factors. And the most important factor was colonialism. So what they did actually was that they outsourced their human misery. You have to think of Europe. You shrink all the population of Europe from Canada, from America, from Australia, from New Zealand back into Europe. Then you will understand that Europe is worse than the worst slum that you can see in India. It is because they spread wide. And it is because they almost cleansed a lot of tribes and populations everywhere else. And they created slave labor. They created indentured labor. And it was from indentured laborers from India who actually created each and every institution of the West. They went, they toiled, they died, they were abused, they were tortured, they were chained, they were whipped. Those people created all the infrastructure. Today, if you go out and if you see those beautiful railway lines and everything, and we admire in the West, you have to remember that they have been built on these indentured laborers' misery. So, they outsourced the human misery and they became egalitarian. India took the tough path. India, the social emancipatory forces in India were based on Dharma. So because they were based on Dharma, they also fought against social stratification. But that fight was through spirituality. That particular fight was done by people who were inherently spiritual. It was their spiritual sadhana, and because of their spiritual sadhana, naturally the social emancipation happened. Nowhere else you can see this. Nowhere else you can see people from the so-called priestly class. They would do self-criticism like anything. Again, I will tell you three stories, different parts of Indian history. There was a seer, a great Vedic seer. His name was Kavashaka. And once there was a big drought, this is during the Vedic times, and so they wanted to do a particular yajna. All the saints, all the important Purohits and the rishis, they have come there, they have assembled around the yajna pit. Then comes Kavashaka, he also comes and sits there. Now, others say, we know this person. His mother had been working in the places of gamblers. So he cannot be considered as a Brahmana, he is a Brahmana, let us throw him out. So he is thrown out of that particular assembly hall of Yajna. When he is thrown out, in that desperation, he becomes a Mantradrishta. And as he becomes Mantradrishta, the Saraswati river suddenly starts flowing around him. And to this day, when you are doing the Vedic Yajna, the mantras that are uttered, when you touch the water, when you bring the ritual water, those mantras are the mantras that were revealed to Kavashaka during this particular event. So this is one event. This happened during Vedic times. Being North India, you all should be aware of the story related to Saint Ravidas. So when Sadguru Ravidas was asked to produce a bangle that the Ganga has given to him earlier, the pair of that bangle, then we are told that the bangle came in the pot that he would be keeping. The pot that he would be keeping for his leather work. So, in that pot the Ganga came and showed the greatness of Sadguru Ravidas. So this is in the medieval period. Now we come to the early modern period. In the early modern period, the colonialism had started. Famines, repeated famines have become a kind of a repeated occurrence in India, particularly in South India. That is where the East India Company had actually come. In that place, there was, in a village, there was a person called Sridhar Ayyawal. So the Sridhar Ayyawal had to give Tithi to his Pitrus, and so he had prepared all the ceremonial food. At that time, there was a famine. And he was going to take the ritual bath, he had gone, and when he was coming back, he saw a person belonging to scheduled community who was nearing his death because he was not having food. So he took that person to his house and he offered the food that had been prepared for the Pitrus to this person. And when the Brahmin community around came to know about it, they got really angry and they told him that to atone for this sin, you have to go to Ganga. You have to go and you have to take bath in Ganga and you have to come back. Now, in those particular days, going to Ganga and coming back and then doing the Tithi for the Pitrus is absolutely impossible. Even today, it is impossible. In one day, how he could do that? So, what he did was, he just sang some hymns to Ganga Mata, and in the well of his house, the Ganga started flowing out into the streets itself. The Ganga started flowing. To this day, that particular day is celebrated in South India, in Tamil Nadu, in that particular village. Now, you are having three different phases. In all this, you will find that the river becomes, which is always the symbol of India's national life. That river also becomes the symbol of social emancipation. It tells you what kind of social values you should actually do. And it is not making this some kind of a revolutionary, radical woke thing. No. Naturally, it is making it part of your life. And this is the greatness of Indian culture. We have to understand this very clearly. And we have to create a sociology based on this. We have to create our own sociological framework based on this. So what could be that sociological framework based on this? For this again, I will give you an example of a very interesting personality. His name is J.B.S. Haldane. Haldane was a polymath. He was a writer, he was a biologist, he was a biochemist, he was a physiologist, he was an evolutionary biologist, he was a mathematician, statistician, And he had also contributed to algebra. He is kind of an all-rounder, polymath. So initially he was working in the army, the colonial army. And at that time he visited India. And when he saw India, he told that these are the people who are the most snobbish people in the world. Indian casteism is the most snobbish thing that had been created by any civilization. This is the most snobbish thing that I could see. So he made very negative remarks on India. In 1940s around, he joined Communist Party of Communist Party of Great Britain. He became a Marxist. Of course, if you are a very thinking person, initially, naturally, you will gravitate towards Marxism. So he became a Marxist. Later, he got disillusioned with Marxism because the Marxists in Soviet Union were running a campaign against genetics. They were killing genetics in large numbers. So you would always hear that Marxism is a very scientific thing, but in reality, Marxism killed more number of scientists for ideological reasons than any other religion. Not even Catholic Church could kill that number of people in such a short time. Marxists killed that number of people within a short time. So he got disillusioned at that particular point of time. He also again started reading Hindu literature, the philosophical literature. Still he was attracted to Marxism. He told that, okay, this is a flaw in the Marxist state, but Marxism could be good. But slowly he was moving towards Hindu view of world. And then he gave a lecture at Royal Anthropological Society. In that he said, I need to create a new format, a new framework, and that new framework cannot be the anthropology that we are practicing today, because this anthropology, these are his words, that this particular anthropology is colonial anthropology. And colonial anthropology has its own prejudices and its own biases. Then there is another anthropology called Marxist anthropology. Marxist anthropology is also having deep colonial elements in it. And it is, at that time he was writing in around 1952-53, he was telling that it is just 40 years old. And we do not know how long it would be there. And his words proved to be prophetic. By 1991, Soviet Union had collapsed. Then he said there is this Hindu anthropology. And Hindu anthropology has a sustained history of, according to him, 2000 years. That is very longer than the colonial anthropology and the Marxist anthropology. So he said that let us practice Hindu anthropology and let us view the cultures around us through Hindu anthropology. Because he considered that as having lesser biases and as having proved itself in the human civilization for 2000 years. Other anthropologies have collapsed or they are deeply flawed. So he said, and what is the framework of this anthropology? He used the works of a very important Indian sociologist, Nirmal Kumar Bose. And he said that the Purusharthas would form the basis of this anthropology. Think about it. This is something that Haldane told long back, and later he came to India, and then he was working in the Indian Statistical Institute. He was one of the institution builders. He trained a lot of Indian geneticists, and despite all that, he saw a flaw in India. And so remember, this was the person who said when he first came to India, he said the Indian caste system is the most snobbish caste system in the world. Okay, and he considered it as inhuman and as based on injustice and all that. Now in a lecture he said, the ancient Indian Varna system, despite all the demerits that one may say on that, as a merit. If you are having a son of a zamindar and if you are having a son of a Brahmin, the Brahmin would always be valued higher than the zamindar. It is not just based on birth, it is based on the value that is given to the knowledge. So Indians had this idea that knowledge is more important than the political power and the financial power of the people. Unfortunately, I see today in India that the politicians are called to inaugurate science congresses. I think that this new Varna system that is emerging in India is very dangerous. We should get the principles of the old Varna system again and make this nation great. So this is the thing that a person like Haldane felt, who was a Marxist and a deeply rooted Marxist, not just a superficial Marxist, a convinced Marxist and a great scientist who later transformed into a very Sattvic person. And then he was saying this. Okay. So what I am again suggesting is that we should start looking into our history, looking particularly into our social history. History is not just the events, the kings, the dynasties. Remember, again in India, we do not have that kind of history writing. The traditional Indian history writing is more scientific than the so-called history writing of the West. The history writing of the West is always based on the political narrative. Who is having the most political power, who is having more, who had killed more number of people, their history would be written. Okay. Who is the greatest widow maker? That is the criterion for Western history. But if you look at Indian history, actually Acharya Vinoba Bhave made it very beautifully. He told about this. I think it was Dr. S. Radhakrishnan who wanted to discuss about educational system in India, free India. He came to see Vinoba Bhave in his ashram in Maharashtra. And he talked about history, about Akbar, about the great Chandragupta Maurya and others. So as he was talking about all this, Vinoba Bhave called his gardener. His gardener was an old Muslim person. Called the gardener and asked his gardener, do you know about Akbar and Humayun? Then the gardener said, I don't know. Who are they? Some relatives or some neighbors, I really do not know. Then he asked, do you know about Tulsidas and Kabir? Then he said, of course I know Kabir Doha and everything. Then he told Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, this is the real history. Think about this. This is the real history, he said. So this is the history of the weavers. If you look at the actual histories that have been written and that are retained by our memories, you will find that Mahabhakta Vijayam is remembered. And in Mahabhakta Vijayam, who are all the people? Tailors, potters, weavers, housewives. Who was the king who was ruling at that time? That king becomes a footnote. So the Kabir the weaver is the actual historical phenomenon for Indian, and the king who ruled at that time becomes the footnote. The same is true for South India. In South India we have a Puranam called Periya Puranam. So it lists all the histories of great saints who lived at that time. Many saints, different professions they were there. So the very first saint they were talking about, the first name they were talking about is that of a potter. A potter. And that list contains kings, that list contains Brahmins, the list contains influential traders, everything. But they were talking about a potter first. And what did this potter do? All this potter did was, one day his wife suspected him of having some affair. And then she told, you should not come near us in the name of Shiva. That was the only word she said. So he respected that word till the end of his life. He never came near her. He respected her words. Then at a particular point of time, Shiva comes and through a particular miraculous event, he makes the people realize that these two, and nobody knows about it. That is the beauty of it. Nobody knows about it. In all other ways, they were very real, ideal husband and wife, but he was respecting her words. And then Shiva reveals this, and that is what this man did. Okay, he respected the words of his wife. And he was the person, he was a potter, and he was the person who is told first in the entire list. So, this is the narrative. And who was the king who ruled at that time? Really, we do not know. But everybody knows about this Neelakanta Kuyavana who was a potter. Nobody knows who ruled at that time. Okay. So, just think about it. This is the kind of history that we have created. Today, or after some 5 years, suddenly a Western historian might say that we also need decentralized history. So, we have to look into this non-royal, non-political accounts of people, and then that becomes a craze. Actually, we already have that. So we have to look into our systems. We have to look into our Bhakti literature. We have to look into our Dharmic literature. And we have to create a social history, not a chronological history, a social history out of this. And that is what I have actually attempted in this book. And thank you very much for giving this opportunity to